Hey everybody. So I have been trying to focus on my mental health more in recent weeks, which funnily enough started even before the election results, but I think we can all agree that it is more important than ever now with, everything. So I wanted to talk a little about how that whole mental health journey has been going, both to kind of lay it out for myself and also because I think talking about this kind of thing can be really helpful in terms of both destigmatizing mental health talk and also because sometimes the way you find out that you have a certain condition is by hearing someone else talk about it. It can also just be helpful to see that other people are struggling with the same things you are and that you're not alone. So, yeah. Before I get into it, though, please know that I'm going to be discussing mental health struggles in depth in this video, some of which could potentially be triggering. So please take care of yourself and immediately stop watching if you feel like what I'm saying is causing you harm. That is the opposite of my intention with this video. And the last thing I want is for anything I'm saying here to cause anyone distress. So please take care of yourself. So yeah, I have known for pretty much my entire adult life that I have anxiety and suffer from panic attacks. It's kind of hard not to notice that. I also suffered from some pretty serious depression back in my early 20s, though thankfully that's mostly past now, except for the occasional shallow dip back into the depressive waters, which luckily does not happen all that often. The OCD diagnosis is pretty new for me. I had a vague suspicion about it on and off over the years, but my thinking regarding it was always like, oh, it's pretty mild. It doesn't really interfere with my daily life. And anxiety is really the big bad that makes my life difficult. But I've been making my way through an OCD workbook I bought online, and the more I read it and go through the exercises, the more I'm realizing how interwoven my anxiety and my OCD are, and really just how much of what I do and think are actually signs of my OCD. Now, the same book is not going to be great for everyone, but just in case, and I'll link to it below, but in case anyone is interested, it's this one, The Complete OCD Workbook by Scott M. Granite. So I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but but that's the one I've been working from. But again, that doesn't mean it's the right one for you, just the one that I've been reading. So I think it's pretty common to have one set image of what OCD is based on how we see it portrayed in the media. Phobia of germs, needing to line things up perfectly, feeling compelled to touch the same spot 10 times in a row or switch the lights on and off, things like that. And, those definitely are legitimately symptoms of OCD, but there's so much more to it than that. And like anything, it's a spectrum. So not everyone with OCD experiences the same level of obsessions and compulsions or has them manifest in the same way. So OCD can look completely different from one person to another. And for me, one of the most interesting things about reading this book has been learning about all the different ways OCD can manifest, most of which I didn't even know about until now. So for me personally, and I talked about this a little in my most recent Heartstopper reaction video because, of course, Charlie is also struggling with OCD. But for me, a lot of my OCD stems from a place of having past trauma and wanting to feel like I can prevent further trauma through my actions. So as Charlie says, a lot of it is about control, like feeling like you can control things in your life when things out of your control keep happening and hurting you. So for example, if I say, I love you, be good, be safe to Darla every time I leave the house, it will prevent her from getting hurt or dying while I'm gone. If I avoid wearing a certain shirt I was wearing when I had a bad day, I won't have a bad day today. If I hold my breath anytime I pass someone on the street, even when I'm wearing a mask, I won't get COVID. If I unplug everything in my apartment before I leave or go to bed, the place won't catch on fire. If I avoid saying certain words or putting voice to certain thoughts, the bad things I'm worried about happening won't happen. If I don't look at or write a certain word like death or accident, then no death or accidents will happen to me or anyone I care about. The funny thing is, I always just thought that I was really superstitious, but no, you have OCD. That's OCD. I also think a lot of this started when I was a kid, specifically after my dad died. So after that happened, I started feeling like if I didn't tell my mom I loved her every single time I was about to leave her, even if it was just to go to bed or go outside to play or like even saying goodbye to her on the phone, if I didn't do that, then she would die while we were apart. Like saying I love you made me feel like I was keeping her safe. Like doing that gave me the control to avoid losing another parent. I also started having fairly severe intrusive thoughts around then, like these flashes of awful things happening or of me hurting myself or worse. Like I remember sitting on the school bus and having this sudden violent flash of seeing the bus driver slumped over in his seat, dead from a heart attack. Or I would have this vivid flash of what it would feel like to get hit and killed by a car when I was out walking somewhere. And that one still happens to me all the time when I'm outside walking, which is not super fun. But when I got a little older, I had stronger intrusive thoughts about throwing myself off a balcony or stabbing myself with a knife. Like I still feel kind of unsteady holding anything sharp or being up high somewhere because of that. And while thoughts like that happen to everybody, not just people with OCD, for me, they were really frequent and really upsetting. And the thing about intrusive thoughts is that they're not things you're actually planning to do. Having a thought flit through your head does not make it real. But for someone with OCD, it feels like the thought and the action are the same, and that's why it can be so upsetting. It was also around the time right after my dad died that I started engaging in what are called checking compulsions, where I would check the locks on the house doors and windows just over and over again before I could go to bed at night. I was usually the last one going to bed, so I don't think any of my family ever noticed that I was doing this, but I would just go around and around the house checking and rechecking before I felt secure enough to go to sleep. Another really common aspect of OCD is reassurance seeking, which is where you ask someone for reassurance on something over and over and over again. Getting that reassurance gives you a temporary relief, which is the motivation for doing it in the first place, but because it's temporary, you keep doing it and probably really annoy the other person in the process, especially if they don't know what's going on with you. So I 1000% did that when I was younger, and probably to a certain extent these days too, though I do think I've really improved on that front. I also suffer from contamination OCD to a certain degree, which is the more familiar manifestation of OCD where you feel like you've been contaminated by touching things or animals or people, and you feel compelled to avoid touching those things, and or you wash your hands more than is strictly necessary. So for some people, this manifests in washing their hands for a very long time, whereas for me, it's more about frequency. So even when I'm in my apartment completely alone, I feel like I need to wash my hands after I touch basically anything. And if I can't wash my hands right away, I experience a lot of emotional distress. So this mainly manifests when I'm about to touch food. Like even if I've literally just washed my hands, I feel like I need to wash them again and keep washing them, even if all I've done is touch a spoon or something else that's clean. Or even just if like I've washed my hands, but I feel like they've been in the open air for too long. Like I don't know. But yeah, that's a big part of why my hands always have just tons of little cuts on them in the wintertime because of the constant hand washing and the cold, dry air. I also wash and rewash silverware and dishes, even if all they've done is come into contact with a clean countertop or have been sitting in the open air for more than a few seconds, or even if they're just near something that I see as being unclean. And I also have just right OCD, which is where I feel like things have to be arranged and tidied in a certain way, or else I feel really anxious and panicky and just, yeah. So there are tons of ways OCD manifests, and this is not in any way an exhaustive list of how it manifests, even just for me, but those are some of the big ones. So I have all these obsessions and compulsions. What do I do next? How do I deal with them? So there are a few things that at least this book suggests, and that, based on my limited research, many people seem to agree on. One of them is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is basically where you're talking to a therapist or someone to try to identify and change negative thought patterns. And that is helpful in a lot of ways. But with OCD, what apparently has a higher success rate is something called exposure and response prevention, or ERP. So with ERP, you're basically exposing yourself to the things that bring on your obsessions and then not doing the compulsion. So you're sitting with the anxiety that it brings until the anxiety settles. And the more you do that, the easier it becomes and the less anxiety crops up in response. So in one of the early chapters of the workbook, the author mentioned one example of ERP, and that example was writing down the sentence like, name of person I love will be killed in a car accident today. And the book encouraged me to try doing that. And I just could not. Like, I could not do it. I genuinely believe that writing those words will cause that to happen. And I didn't realize how deeply I believed that until I was confronted with the idea of actually doing it. So the good thing about the way you do ERP, or at least the way that's outlined in this workbook, is that you start small and work your way up. So for example, if one of your compulsions is to check the stove multiple times before you leave your house, you would try checking it once and then leaving your house for 5 minutes. And maybe the next time you'd leave for 10. And you'd slowly raise the amount of time until you were able to do it for an entire work day or a weekend or a vacation. So the point of exposure therapy isn't really about facing the things you fear so much as facing the anxiety that's associated with them. And that is definitely something I need to work on. So yeah, it's going to be difficult, but I'm also looking forward to trying it because despite what I've always thought, this is genuinely interfering with my life. And I think a lot of what I previously thought was just anxiety is actually a fun mix of anxiety and OCD, or even just anxiety brought on by OCD. So I'm going to keep working through my workbook and trying ERP and CBT too, since I've finally found an online therapist who takes my insurance, and hopefully it'll help. You know, like Charlie, I find it hard to believe sometimes that I can ever get better, but I also know that I have been in much lower places than this many times in my life, and I have gotten better. So maybe I can get better this time too. There was also one particular passage in this workbook that really meant a lot to me, so I would like to share it before I close out this video. So that passage was, "My OCD patients are some of the bravest people I know. Please never lose sight of that." And I don't think that just goes for people with OCD, but for everyone who's struggling with their mental health. Like, there are people out there who go to work, go to school, spend time with people, answer emails, go shopping, drive, go on buses and trains and planes, and it's easy for them. Like, they can just do it and it's not a big deal. But when stuff like that is a struggle and you do it anyway, like when the thought of leaving your house or getting out of bed or answering a phone call makes you feel like you are literally going to die, but you do it anyway, like that is real strength and that is real bravery. I think it's really unfortunate that so many people feel like having mental health issues equates to weakness, because it really, really doesn't. Like, people who deal with stuff like that are holding on to strength that most people can't even imagine. Anyway, I'm not sure if this video was helpful to anyone or if it was just a way for me to talk through things for my own benefit, but either way, thank you so much for being here and thank you so much for watching. Huge thanks, as always, to our patrons who are amazing, wonderful, my favorite people, and a special shout out to our Nick Nelson members, Kelly Walker, Paul Z, Kim Engel, Ken Smither, Lauren Javier, Mark Walker, Sarah Parker Schemmelt, and Courtney McAlexander. Okay, that's going to do it for this video. Have a wonderful rest of your day or night or whatever time of day it may happen to be. I'll see you next time. Take care of yourself. Okay?